Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about something that has had numerous books written about it, is touched on time and time and time again, and something that I've kind of touched on before but never gone through the stages of it so much as just appreciating the idea of it as a whole and some of its mechanisms. And that is intimacy, most prominently romantic intimacy, where before I kind of touched on intimacy as a more general thing. Now I want to talk about intimacy in terms of the 6 stages that people tend to go through in their relationships. Now, some of these, like the kind of crush period or the honeymoon period, are early on stages that most people are familiar with. But there are lots of people that then don't appreciate the later stages because they've not been made aware of them. And so as a result, there are lots of people that kind of go into relationships or have relationships and they kind of don't ever want them to change, or they don't anticipate them changing. There's no realization of the fact that they will change. And so as a result, that causes friction, it causes collapse. There are lots of people who strive to get back to a kind of honeymoon period, and there are ways and elements of doing that in later stages, but they require a lot more thought, a lot more work, effort, concentration, and sharing than they did early on, and yet people aren't aware of that. And so that's kind of what I want to get into in some of the things that we're going to be talking about here. So, the first stage, one that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, is having a crush, jumping into the crush stage, where your brain lights up, goes, ooh, pretty. And as a result, you have things like oxytocin and dopamine kind of triggering in your brain. You know, the love drugs, as it were, the kind of love and happiness, or attachment and happiness drugs, kicking off in your brain and having a little party. And this, I feel like one of the best representations of this is in every kid's cartoon, where you see the character just kind of looking at someone that they're falling for, looking at someone that they like, and their eyes just turn into love hearts, or love hearts start floating off them. And that's kind of what happens here, because especially in regards to the person that your feelings are focused on, there's no longer that kind of testing of reality. You don't see their weaknesses, or aren't as willing to pick those weaknesses and things to pieces. What's something that might have initially turned you away or made you feel uncomfortable doesn't anymore, because you're no longer testing. You're looking at getting further into a relationship with that person, and that's all that matters. In which case, there's one thing that I'm sure lots of people say and advise to people. I never had it said to me because I just never did. Maybe people thought I knew it already. But don't make decisions when you're in this state. When you're not testing reality, when you aren't checking in with yourself or checking in with kind of what's real, what you know, relative to kind of what you just want to believe, you end up making mistakes, things that end up falling to pieces, you end up having problems. Have a friend to check in with on these things. Sometime try and make sure it's a friend that will actually call you on your shit, because otherwise you could fall into all kinds of different problems and potholes and things like that along the way. But it's a tough thing to do when you first find someone that you are very attracted to. Whether you go and tell that person or not, completely different matter. But you have that moment of kind of euphoric high when you're in their presence, when you see them. And that can make you shy, that can make you bold, that can do all kinds of things to your behavior. And you don't, for instance, if you're feeling bold, you don't want to make a decision on money whilst you're in that state, for instance, because it could then land you in a world of hurt. You don't want to feel very shy when going for a new job or something like that either. It doesn't necessarily always prompt the same set of responses to get you where you want to go. So when you're in that stage, when you start feeling it, because I'm sure you know what it feels like, maybe take a moment, make sure that you've got someone there that you can kind of use as a sounding post, make sure you're not going crazy, make sure that you're not losing track of things. Now the next stage, if you're lucky enough to get past just having a crush and actually go and talk to that person and get into a relationship with them, if it's of a solid, sturdy kind of start, then everything seems wonderful all the time. Yeah, that person smells amazing, looks amazing, sounds amazing. Holding their hand is amazing. Staying in bed with them all day is amazing. Doing anything with them is amazing. And you don't argue. There's nothing wrong, and that's because you're both still wearing those kind of rose-tinted spectacles. And as a result, that this is the kind of honeymoon period when you're just getting used to each other and you're very, very closely tied to one another. And good God, can this sometimes make you very difficult for other people to handle? But also, this is where most people slip up because they don't realize that state is limited. It's impermanent. It can leave you in anywhere between like 6 to 18 months in most long-term relationships, and it can leave you in an awful lot less time if there's something that's glaringly obvious to you that's detrimental. Like a new crush handcuffs you to her and refuses to let you go. A boyfriend tries to remove you from all your friends. Whatever. Those kind of big signals are things that you tend to snap you out because it's enough of a flush of your system with other emotions that it pushes the kind of oxytocin and dopamine out of you to allow you to think straight. But otherwise, if there's no reason to cause those neurochemicals to get flushed out of your system or to shock you into reality again, that's still only about 6 to 18 months, give or take, that you're going to be sat in this phase where the world is wonderful and you don't want to do anything other than be with that person. Now, if you go beyond the 6 to 18 months and you're just still really attached to that person, then that's great. But in this period, again, it tends to lead on to a lot of kind of antisocial moments, a lot of kind of you locking yourself away with those other people. And even if you're not doing that, it's still the kind of area where the two of you making plans together, especially long-term plans, can be really potentially problematic, potentially misleading, just because you end up making all these plans and saying all these things and there's no grounding for it. You want all of this stuff and it just, you get all your hopes up and then it doesn't pan out, and then you can confuse plans not coming to fruition from this period where you weren't thinking straight anyway, you weren't necessarily pairing things off with reality, to the overall wealth and kind of value and health of your relationship. And that can really erode things and leave people feeling unfulfilled early on, which is why when just as an example from myself, when I've got into a new relationship, when I first got together with Hannah, there were lots of kind of limits and momentary breaks and things like that I put into our discussions to try and make sure that there were moments where the two of us could actually have a think through what we were doing, a think through what we were talking about, and whether or not we were happy with it. Turns out we are, because we're still together. But it's a case of having those moments, taking those breaks, having those discussions and thinking around stuff so that everything is laid out and everything's understood, and making sure that things will be understood after that 6 to 18 months rather than just during it. Yeah, because if suddenly there's a change of heart because things haven't been discussed and haven't been spelled out during that time when you're both on good terms with each other without any issues, if then you get to the end of that period and you look back at those plans and things and they've never been truly defined, and it seems like you want different things from it, you've taken away different things from it, then all of a sudden the relationship breaks down. And if it's something that's meant a lot to you, then I imagine that that's probably not something you want to happen. Now then we get to the end of the honeymoon period and we get into kind of the pairing or bonding period. And, this is kind of where things like lust, that instant kind of wanting to gratify yourself with that other person, turns into the more long-term feelings of care, affection, long-term kind of attachment to that person. And it can be a shock to a lot of people, facing uncomfortable truths about who that person is, or who you have become with that person, or where those things that you really didn't need to talk about before suddenly become things that you need to talk about. Everything from political views to the way that you two want to handle time together, to the way that you want to focus on career, or whether you want to focus on your relationship, or how you want to kind of work forward with those things. Little things. A lot of the things that occur in this moment tend to be like, oh, well, actually, this person that I'm with doesn't live up to a certain standard that I hold, be it personal hygiene, be it tact and the way that they interact with people, be it online etiquette in regards to what they post and how they post it. It could be any one or all of these things. And so as a result, it's this moment can be a real shock, especially if it's been 18 months of bliss followed by a sudden realization that this person isn't as wonderful as you thought they were. It becomes a moment where the big question of, can you live with this? Can you be happy with this? Has to be asked. And, it can... Suddenly that question being asked can replace the kind of heady wonder of this relationship that you're in with this wonderful person, into this big weight in your stomach that, could kind of knock you over and make you feel weak and confined and stuff like that. And it's one of the things the you need to treat with a degree of realism, because at no point should anyone just settle for someone just because they're there. You should always look for what makes you happy and what stands out most. This is where, more so than anywhere else, and I've said this before, but this is the stage where realizing that the person that you're with is still just a person, and that perfection is impossible. So expecting perfection from another person is not just impossible, it's just unreasonable. And so it becomes just that question of, this person isn't perfect. They have flaws. But are they flaws that they're aware of? Are they flaws that they're working to deal with? Are they flaws that I can live with? And this is, saying that yes, you can appreciate their flaws and it doesn't matter, you still care for that person, is where you get into the true depth of relationships. It's the jumping off point. It's you've been hanging around next to the pool with this person all along and having a great time, just paddling in the water a little bit. And then this part of the relationship is when you've had to jump in the deep end, and it can be terrifying for people. It can cause sudden rifts in relationship where one person needs time, but they're not willing to communicate that, and the other person doesn't realize that they need time, and they just feel like distance is being created, and so the whole matter breaks down. And so, the overall, it's a very different feeling to have, the kind of long-term affection where you care, you're generally caring for someone rather than just wanting love and sexual desire and all those things from a person. It's a situation where it's a lot kind of flatter and more day-to-day, but it makes you smile more. It gives you a warmer feeling afterwards, rather than the kind of blazing inferno that then goes out and then it's just settled and happy. This is a more long-term kind of flow of good, is the best way I think I could probably describe it. And if this doesn't happen, if one person says no, this isn't, they can't live with this, or if that kind of distance is created due to a lack of kind of association and communication, then the relationship isn't likely to last particularly long. So then the next one is kind of, the next stage is where you kind of shift beyond the the limits of just the soft affection. Where it becomes a case of you become pretty immovable, and irreplaceable kind of state monuments in each other's lives almost. And so, as this could be when marriage happens. This could be when you've gone and done a big thing together. Past one of those relationship milestones, gone on holiday, gone traveling together, moved in together, whatever. This tends to be the stage where, rather than just that long-term affection, it's that big slotting into each other's lives and having to manage that. And it's where the moments of lust will still return periodically. It's much more of a case of the long-term kind of appreciation of what's going on that settles into place. And so, it's when you're in those situations, there are a couple of different things that happen. For a lot of people, you have the kind of shifting into more of a routine life, a much more secure life, and so as a result, the stress drops off, and so you've got much more confidence and comfort and security in that situation, which then actually also pays out into a greater level of intimacy, both on a normal level, because you're just having to share everything with each other and work around each other at times, but also on a more physical level, because that level of comfort and security and well-being, especially for women, will carry over into the bedroom more. And so it becomes a situation where I saw a study recently, in fact, where it's if your relationship exists and survives strongly for 4 years or more, then within those 4 years you may have less physical intimacy, but then moving beyond that 4-year point, compared to other people who are single or in less favourable relationships, your sexual activity is much higher, and not just much higher, but much more satisfying. But as a result, this is rather unsurprisingly as a result of that, where lots of people then start having children and growing into those relationships as not just partners, but also potentially parents, and big long-term appreciations of kind of where your life is going, what you want from life, and how the two of you can go on that journey together. When that isn't fully appreciated, or when things happen outside of the control or order of the people that are involved in that relationship, that random pregnancies or people's lives not going the way they want to, if you've got that good level of communication, that good level of security and stability, the relationship is more likely to survive through stuff like, say, a member of this partnership getting laid off from work, and so as a result there's all of a sudden money issues and things like that. The level of comfort and intimacy that's kind of developed and built up over time during this period is what's going to allow that partnership to survive something like a drastic and sudden lack of resources, or a very sudden shift in the balance between home life and work life, or if someone suddenly gets ill or something like that. It's once you hit those bigger milestones, there's a solidification of that person as a thing in your life. And a lot of these things are usually attributed to things like marriage or moving in together and stuff like that. But there are lots of different relationship dynamics, and there are lots of different ways that this kind of locking in and solidification can occur. And it can be anything from the big life events like that to much smaller life events that are more significant to just the two of you. Going and being seen as part of the family when visiting someone, or when you turn up to an event together and you are recognised as that partnership in full, even if you may kind of be very separate or whatever else. It can be different for everybody. But it's this appreciation of kind of each other as part of normal now. The then, and it's a good normal. The then allows for the next stage, which is not as fun. And the next stage is threats. You know, the threats that you go through. As said, you've got death, you've got children, you've got work life, you've got things like mortgages and all these kind of other things that add stress and stress and stress based on finance, based on people's behaviour, based on everything. And if you've developed well enough during the previous stage where you're locking things in and you're kind of solidifying stuff, this is where that's going to be tested, and it should be tested. You know, that in theory you should have been checking in and testing time and time again as you are developing. But then, you know, if you've not been doing that, this is the moment where you see an awful lot of middle-aged people cheating or going and getting divorces and stuff like that, because they have reached this point where the tests have just occurred, and the tests are occurring, and some people can't take it, and some people can, but they don't want to, and then they get stuck in unhappy relationships, or they end up having to try and do an awful lot more work towards things because they didn't do the work earlier on in prior stages of the relationship. And so as a result, you end up with these individuals going into kind of couples therapy, where there's usually an awful lot of resistance to it from one person or the other, rather than appreciation from both that go along just to fix the problem, solve the problem, and move on. There's usually one person that wants to fix it, one person that doesn't, and it becomes a very stereotypical kind of mess. It can be really difficult. But this is the period where we need to have learned a few things before we get to this point. Firstly, yes, the whole no one's perfect. You need to communicate, you need to work with them, you need to realise that they aren't going to be perfect all the time. You need to realise that this is just life, it's not conspiring against you, and the thing that stands out as most important to me, personally, because it's a thing that has always come up in the relationships that have meant the most to me, including the one that I'm in at the moment, is you are always stronger when you work together. If you have the attitude of the two of us working together can't be beaten, we just need to find a way to get past it, and you both need to get behind that idea, then if you've solidified that through the previous stages of kind of doing things together and working stuff out when you're first kind of bonding with each other properly after the honeymoon period, when you're becoming more solid and supporting one another through the big life goals that the two of you are undertaking, the big moments that you're going through, then again, there are going to be hardships along the way, but they're not going to be that major. And it needs to be a case of when you are seeing those things, you need to get used to going, yeah, but the two of us together got through it. Then you get to this point, and none of those things should be, none of these issues, mortgages and children and whatever else, should be as daunting or as problematic, because you should have discussed it beforehand. You should have communicated well around the topic when things change. You should appreciate that the two of you working together will get through it, and then you actually need to do the work together. And that should round it out and be fine. The reason why we have such high divorce rates and why so many people get stuck in loveless marriages and things later on, especially from prior generations that are kind of in their later years of their relationship, or middle of their relationship in terms of their full lifespan now, that are finding things miserable and going and getting divorces, going and separating, going and doing all these things. It's because this groundwork was not done before this stage, this fifth stage. You know, there's only one stage after this, so there's not really an awful lot of time to kind of fill out that learning very quickly when a relationship has already got its set patterns, it's already got its set roles within it, and so on and so forth. And you know, this is where the breakdown occurs. It's that moment where the relationship is being tested and it just breaks. All because there was a lack of kind of checking in and communicating and sorting stuff out in those prior stages. But then let's say you have done all of that and you get through this testing kind of troubled time where you need to kind of actively go, the relationship isn't under threat, there is just a threat to be dealt with. Then you get into the last stage where, quite frankly, this is where you see an awful lot of very wholesome stuff. And that is when, children are moving out, or when they're adults, or whatever else. There are usually a couple of major concerns around it that usually come into kind of, mothers feeling like there's a hole in their life, fathers feeling very concerned, and almost imposing at times, the stereotypical bad dads threatening the new boyfriend kind of thing, which isn't healthy, by the way. Don't do that. But it's they also face their other main concern of, well, what do I do now? Because big chunks of the pattern that they've developed over the last 2 stages of this relationship, in regards to family, in regards to where they're living, what they're doing, they tend to start to just either normalize and not really be a concern anymore. You pay off your mortgage, or your children leave home, or you've just both retired from work or whatever else. You get to those kind of periods towards this latter stage of a relationship where then we focus on avoiding things like uncertainty, and we don't like change. There are some of us that kind of thrive on the unknown and the different, but when it comes to change, like sudden change is still something that causes stress, even if we're good at dealing with it, even if it's stress that we look forward to because we've got the right mindset to go, oh, we're going to grow, going to learn something from this, it still causes that stress in the first place, in a way. And this is where all of that stuff that I was talking about just a moment ago, being a team, working together, communicating well, this is the point where all of this stuff comes into play. Because if you hit this stage, you've been through everything together with this other person, and now potentially you've got a lot more free space in your life. The way to maintain your relationship as part of that is to come up with stuff that's meaningful to both of you, stuff that are goals for the both of you, that you can fill those holes in your life with. Be that the two of you spending time going and doing an activity together, going and establishing something new together, starting a business together, whatever it may be. Having that focus on the two of you working together, so that those moments that have been lost, from your day to day, the taking care of kids, the going to work, the having to worry about the mortgage for the end of the month because the mortgage may very well have been paid off by that point. It's all of those things. You need to start setting your own goals that the two of you want to do, and finding your own rewards. Because if you've always wanted to go traveling and you've done some of it, but you've never had the time, you've never had the money, then this would be the time to do it, and the rewards would be the experiences that you're getting as a result of doing it. The stories and memories that you can bring back to whatever. This is the time when you should be capitalizing on those things. And for people who I know I've mentioned kids a few times here, but for those couples who don't want kids, this is still a point where that may very well not have been a factor in your life all along, but there's going to be something that the two of you have focused on in the same way, stuff that you would have had to take care of daily, stuff that you would have had to manage around one another. And so when it comes to this stage, it's probably a case of, that may very well have been attached to work, it might have been attached to health or to something else, and either it might have got worse, it might have got better, it might have got different. It's finding something still to fill out or develop around those kind of things, so that you can continue to secure and keep that solid relationship that you've worked through for 5 other stages that span years, by the way. The first stage is usually the shortest, the crush. It can come and it can go. Each one of these stages afterwards tends to get longer and longer and longer. And so, you've been through a lot to get to the end. making sure that you have that shared meaning, those shared goals, the rewards that you want to seek out together. That's what then gets you kind of solid and happy and satisfied moving forward. Yeah, and there's not really two ways around this. It's just the way that it has to be, because otherwise, you get to this point. This is why you see an awful lot of older couples that don't really talk to each other anymore, and they get very frustrated with each other, and they kind of snap at each other because a lot of stuff's been just slowly dropping away from their lives, from their day to day, and they don't want it to, but they don't know what to replace it with. And because they don't know what to replace it with, you end up with these big gaping holes. And even though they know they love that person, they know that they've been through everything with that person, they know that they care about that person, and they don't want to leave that person, they don't have any way of getting closer to that person again. And this is where, especially when you see people who have had very fulfilling and kind of important moments in their relationships, you'll see one of them unfortunately pass away, and the other one will go very shortly afterwards, just because that's the last thing from their life that they had. There's no shared goal, set meaning that they can continue to kind of push towards on behalf of the other person. It's just an empty void. And when faced with empty voids, we're terrified by empty voids as a species. The same reason we're afraid of the dark. It's the unknown, it's the different, it's the things that are so intangible that we can't grasp them to work with. And so you see collapses happening. Make sure that you share those goals, set those goals, find meaning in what you're doing together, because that way, even if one of you disappears, it makes sure that the other one has something to live for. And that's a kind of maybe a little dark way to end this video, one that's been talking about the good things in relationships and how strong they can be through these different stages. But in my mind, as someone that would very much prefer not to pass away, I'd much prefer to be around forever. It's an unfortunate truth that it's probably going to happen, unless some science, some tech suddenly springs out of nowhere that means aging just isn't a problem anymore, or we conquer death. It's a situation that we're not likely to see anytime soon, and so it's an unfortunate truth that has to be recognised, has to be realised, and there have to be things that we take into account. And the one thing that we should do, we should take into account more than anything else, is the person that we've seemingly wanted to spend our entire existence with, judging from the other stages that we've worked through. So, it's important stuff to keep in mind. Probably not important stuff to worry about when you're just finishing the honeymoon period and you're just getting into being kind of bonding and being affectionate with each other. Maybe leave it for a while, a few years, say, before you start worrying about those things too much. But it's still stuff that when it comes to it, needs to be taken into account. But anyway, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because, obviously everyone goes through these stages in different ways, in different times. Every combination of people getting into a relationship is going to be slightly different. As I said earlier, there are so many different types of relationship dynamic that, even the most pedestrian relationships, or seemingly pedestrian relationships, have their quirks, they have their differences, they have their strangeness to them. And kind of getting into that and understanding those things is usually something that can only really be done by those two people involved. So, it's if you've got thoughts, if you've got experiences that you'd like to share that maybe embody parts of this, I'd love to hear them. I'm sure that we could have an interesting discussion about them. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the video later. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.